We are fortunate, as I say, to be presenting tonight the 30th annual James Monroe Lecture, and again, a very impressive roster of folks who have presented programs before, White House curators, award-winning authors, distinguished professors, and tonight's speaker is no less than any of those who have come before. David Head is an historian, an author, and lecturer of history at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Originally from Western New York, he received his BA in history from Niagara University and his PhD from the University of Buffalo, the State University of New York. David is the author of Privateers of the Americas, Spanish-American Privateering from the United States in the Early Republic, published by the University of Georgia Press in 2015, which won the 2016 John Gardner Maritime Research Award, presented by the Fellows of the G.W. Blunt White Library at Mystic Seaport Museum, which is a wonderful facility up there. He has been working for the past couple of years on 3 projects, all of which are nearing fruition at different stages. He's been fairly busy. He's edited an encyclopedia on the Atlantic world, which is coming out at the end of this month. He has also edited a collection of essays on the golden age of piracy that will be appearing next June. And then in 2019, his current book that he is working on about George Washington, the Newburgh Conspiracy, and the Continental Army will come out. So that's quite a trifecta for someone who is also maintaining a teaching load and who happens to be a new father as well. So if nothing else, he is certainly an expert in multitasking. When he is not teaching or writing or taking care of the kids, he also enjoys speaking to community groups, teachers, and historical societies, which is the reason that we're so happy to have him tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Head.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to everyone who is here tonight, and especially the sponsors of the talk. It's quite an honor to be the 30th, to be delivering the 30th annual Monroe Lecture. It sounds very impressive because it is a big honor, and I enjoy being here today. So thanks to Scott and Linda and the people at the Monroe Museum and the people here at Mary Washington History Department and beyond. I'm very honored to be here speaking to you tonight. So the topic tonight is James Monroe and the Spanish-American pirates. You can see the one guy looks familiar probably. That's James Monroe. The other one I'll talk to you about in a second. Doesn't quite look like a pirate, does he? Certainly doesn't have an eye patch or a peg leg or anything. But I'll talk about who that is and why he was something of a headache for the new Monroe administration. We're coming up on the anniversary of Monroe's first annual message to Congress. This is the forerunner of the State of the Union address. He delivered that message to Congress on December 2nd, 1817. In those days, the annual message to Congress was written. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't a speech like it is today. And also in those days, the 19th century, the State of the Union address, if you could call it that, it was kind of an update, a large portion of it was an update on the nation's foreign relations and the status of the relationships with foreign countries. And during that part of Monroe's message, he dealt most extensively with U.S. relations with Spain and Spanish America, because at that point, Spain and Spanish America were in the midst of a series of wars, through which the Spanish-American colonies of Spain achieved their independence. And the United States was implicated in that as well. President Madison had declared U.S. neutrality officially in those conflicts, but many Americans, they wanted to participate. And they did participate by becoming privateers and serving on behalf of the Spanish-American countries. One group of privateers and adventurers and pirates who Monroe was especially concerned with in his message to Congress, had attacked a small island off the coast of Florida, Amelia Island, in the northeast corner of today's state of Florida. That was in Spanish territory at the time, just over the border from Georgia. It's still just over the border from Georgia. But in those days, that was an international border between the United States and Spanish America. So you have people, many of them from the United States, attacking a place in Spanish America. Spain, place that Spain claimed as its own. You can tell already that this has all the markings of an international incident. So I want to talk today about who these guys were who attacked Amelia Island and what the Monroe administration decided to do about it. Now, this is probably a smaller incident. It is certainly within Monroe's time as president, it takes a backseat to more famous developments such as the Monroe Doctrine, the Transcontinental Treaty that acquired the Floridas for the United States, even something like Andrew Jackson's invasion of Florida. I think those are more famous, better known incidents. One of the reasons I think that this Amelia Island episode with the pirates is not as well known is that it was handled very skillfully by the Monroe administration, and what could have been a much larger, more significant problem that blew up into something big was handled. And so it's a case of something that was handled well and didn't get worse than it was. And of course, it's forgotten because it's a success. Okay? Kind of strange how those things go. So that's what I want to talk about today: who these pirates were, and how Monroe dealt with them, and how he did so successfully. Okay. All right, enough by way of introduction here. First, what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of context, a little bit of background about the Spanish-American Wars of Independence, what these privateers and pirates and adventurers, who they were, and how they attacked Amelia Island. So you can know the kind of the context of what Monroe was responding to. So the Spanish-American Wars of Independence, they are an offshoot of the Napoleonic Wars, in a similar way that the War of 1812 in the United States is also bound up very closely with the Napoleonic Wars also. So the Spanish-American Wars of Independence began in 1808, and they're touched off by Napoleon's invasion of Spain. So he invaded Spain, he deposed the King of Spain, and does anyone know who he put in charge as the new King of Spain? His brother, yes, exactly. This is what Napoleon did. He had several brothers, and when he conquered a place, he would put his brother in charge. I have two brothers. Neither one of them has conquered anywhere to make me king. I'm going to take this up with them if I see them for Thanksgiving. Of course, they'll just throw it back to me and say, "What have you conquered?" Well, this isn't about me. This is about you. So that was Napoleon's strategy. Having Napoleon's brother, Bonaparte, on the throne triggered a response both in Spain and in Spanish America, where the Spanish subjects, they formed what were called juntas. These are governing bodies. And the Spanish tradition was that if the king were not available for some reason, if he'd been forced out of power, that these juntas would take charge, and they would govern in the king's name until the king was able to return. So they're not seeking independence right away. Those juntas are formed, as I said, both in Spain and in Spanish America. But for some people who have been interested in independence, this was an ideal moment. At a moment when the king is not in charge, where they can grab power. And that's what some of the juntas did in Spanish America. They used this opportunity to push for independence. And they begin declaring independence in 1811. This is a painting from the 19th century about declaring independence in Venezuela. That was 1811, will become one of the first republics in Spanish America. So the Spanish-American Wars of Independence are about fighting Spain and fighting France for a time, because nobody likes Napoleon or his brother. I don't even think Napoleon and his brother liked each other very much, now that I think of it. And fighting each other for control over Spanish America. So there is, three sides to the conflict? So multiple sides to the conflict. One of the things that the independent Spanish-American governments do to fight against Spain is they commission privateers and they sponsor filibusters. Well, that simply will raise in your mind the question, what is a privateer? And what is a filibuster? Are you going to thank me for anticipating your needs? Here you go. So a privateer is a privately owned warship, meaning it's not a naval vessel. So a privately owned vessel. During peacetime, privateers were usually merchant ships. And when a war began, this is very common in the 18th and 19th century, governments would issue licenses, commissions, in which the owners of privateers could convert their ships over into wartime service. So it's a way of amplifying a nation's naval power by harnessing private ships for the war effort. Ships are enormously expensive to maintain, right? And anybody own a boat? Right? It's a pain. That's why I don't own a boat. It's the maintenance. Well, the cost too to buy one. And I don't live by the ocean. So it's really expensive. So it's easier just to bring additional ships in through this means of privateering. The incentive for privateers, why people do this, is that they get to keep the prizes. The ships and the cargo that they capture are known as prizes. And they get to keep the value of those prizes. If they can prove in a court of law that they have followed the rules of war to obtain those prizes legally. So you follow the procedures, you get to keep what you capture. Privateers are often conflated with pirates, and for good reason. But sometimes privateers, they get a little enthusiastic, to put it nicely, and they overstep the bounds of their commission. You're only supposed to attack ships of your enemy, but sometimes they attack any other ships from other countries, or it gets really complicated where there would be a ship from a neutral country carrying goods from a country of your enemy. Okay, again, is just the goods that you can take, or does that make the whole ship? There are all those kinds of questions. So they get a little bit too aggressive. And sometimes there are people who are just out to attack and plunder, but they like to have a privateering commission because that can cover the kind of things if they get in trouble. So there is a gray area between the two. But in the law, if it would work out clearly, right, privateers, they stick to their enemy during wartime. They don't attack indiscriminately. That's the ideal. A filibuster today is a Senate blocking technique, right, where you just declare your opposition to a bill. I guess they brought it back where you have to at least talk, at least some. For a while there, they just had to say, I filibuster, and that was it, which is kind of weak, right? At least now you have to try and talk and delay the process. In the 19th century, a filibuster was a private military expedition. So some ways analogous, sort of like a land-based privateer. And so this is not a national army, but a land-based force that would go and attack an enemy. Don't ask me how they got conflated with the speechifying, stalling technique. I don't know. But that's the 19th century meaning of the term. Participating in these activities, privateering, filibustering, was popular in the United States, and it was popular in areas near the United States. So Baltimore is one area of intense privateering. New Orleans and the Louisiana coast was another one. Then a couple that were outside of the United States. One in Galveston, Texas, near Houston today. That was an area that was claimed by Spain, the Independent Republic of Mexico, and the United States. So claimed by all three. And then in Amelia Island, Florida. That was the fourth area, the one that I'll talk about today. And these all involved Americans, even the ones that were outside of the United States because they were so close to U.S. borders. Here we have, the picture here is a privateering commission. You can see what this document would have looked like. It's large, not quite as big as it is there, but it's like this. So it's pretty big. And you can see its part form letter. And you fill in the name of the ship, the name of the captain, how many cannon you have, how many men you have, and then it's signed by the authority at the bottom. Those are fun to find because they usually have to fold them out. Like, ooh, is this a treasure map or something? And they have a wax seal at the bottom. They don't tell you a whole lot, but they're impressive looking. I like the picture of the boat at the top. That's nice. Okay. The invasion of Amelia Island. So it was led by a man, the initial invasion came in June of 1817, and it was led by this man here, the guy from the first picture. If you notice something's a little different, I got to confess here, this is not like fake news or something. I flipped the image so that they'd be looking at each other. Okay. I thought that was more effective. It looks like they're staring each other down. But this is the original image. He's looking back the other way. You got to be careful, right? Even historians are changing things a little bit. But I disclosed this to you, so I think we're okay. This is McGregor. He was originally a British officer, and he served during the Napoleonic Wars in the Peninsular Campaign. So that's the battles that were fought in Spain and Portugal, that theater of the Napoleonic Wars. He left the British service. He apparently had some kind of disagreement with a fellow officer. I think it involved drinking or gambling or something, and somebody called somebody else a name, and you know how those things usually end up. So he left the service and he came to Venezuela, where the independent forces, they were really looking for European officers. They were big in demand. And McGregor had the European military training. He became a general in the Venezuelan service. It helped that he married the cousin of Simon Bolivar. That's always helpful to his ascent, his rise in esteem of the other authorities. And he was a general for a while until he had another falling out with a fellow officer, I think this time the authorities. They didn't like the kind of orders they were giving him, and he wanted to strike out on his own. So he became kind of a freelance operator. McGregor is an interesting guy. He always called himself Sir General Gregor McGregor. Like Jack Sparrow is always Captain Jack Sparrow. He's always Sir General Gregor McGregor. There's no evidence that his knighthood or his being a Sir is anything real. He claimed at one time that he came from being part of the Scottish clans. Another time he said he was knighted for his service in Portugal. And I don't think he was really a Sir, but he insisted on having the title. His plan was to conquer Amelia Island in Spanish Florida, establish a base of operations, so regroup, expand, recruit more men from the United States, and then go on to the mainland of Spanish Florida and conquer that Spanish colony, liberate it, bring it into the independent fold. So that was the plan. Why is targeting Amelia Island? So this is Amelia Island today. This is over here, Georgia. Would have been the United States. I mean, well, it still is the United States. This would have been the end of the United States, I should say. And this is Florida, which would have been Spanish territory, Spanish colony of East Florida here. And you can see it's right across the border, right there. It's very easy. That's what made it so attractive to McGregor. This is a great place for smuggling. It had been a center of smuggling previously. A great place for privateering. There's a nice harbor here in today Fernandina Beach. Venice is Fernandina. They call it Fernandina Beach in the 20th century for marketing purposes. And then you can sponsor privateering from there, bring in cargoes, and smuggle them into the United States. His hope then is to have a resupply ship come here, bring more men, more supplies, and then they can push on towards St. Augustine would have been the capital of the Spanish colony at that point. Here, McGregor has the best of both worlds. He's close to the United States. Savannah is up here not too far away. St. Mary's is a town at that time also. But he's outside the U.S. law, so he doesn't have to follow U.S. laws. He can import what he wants. He can run his own privateering operations the way he wants. So close enough to the United States to be useful to him, but far enough out of the United States that he doesn't have to obey U.S. laws. That's what makes it so attractive. McGregor enjoys success. Initially, he conquers Amelia Island. He declares it La República de las Floridas. That's the flag that he raises. Can you guess who designed that flag? Who designed the flag? Gregor McGregor himself, of course. Yes. He dabbles in design when he's not conquering places. He also has a medal struck to commemorate their great victory. And if you can make it out there, it says Amelia, Vini, Vidi, Vici, which is, what's that? Where are the Latinists? I came, I saw, I conquered, which is from what originally? Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul. Okay. So, Julius Caesar conquering Gaul, Gregor McGregor conquering Amelia Island. These are equal feats of arms, destined to be remembered in the annals of world military history. And then he has at the other part there, Floridarium Duque MacGregorio. Florida, or Libertas Floridarium, the liberty of Florida under the leadership of McGregor. So, there you go. Commemorative medals. Will we be receiving commemorative medals as we leave tonight? No? No one was on that part of it. McGregor was a failure. There was little privateering done, little smuggling, because if you don't privateers to bring in the goods, there's not very much to smuggle into Georgia. He encountered a resupply problem, so his ship was supposed to come from New York, but the customs collector there had sharp eyes and said, "You're carrying a lot of guns and have a lot of guys. for going on a merchant ship, a merchant cruise, a merchant voyage. A lot of water and a lot of food for being gone a month. And what's the captain supposed to say? You know, my guys get thirsty and hungry when they shoot. So he made him take off the manpower and the supplies and all that to what was appropriate for the voyage that he said he was going on. So then the ship shows up in Amelia Island and doesn't have the manpower or the supplies to keep going for a campaign against mainland Florida. There's also, by that point, this is September-ish of 1817, so I mean, just a couple months into McGregor's rule there's word that the Spanish were coming back. They weren't just going to let Amelia Island go. They'd regrouped in St. Augustine, were sending a counterattack. So McGregor abandoned Florida. That could have been the end of it and would have saved Monroe a lot of headaches, but another guy shows up, just coincidentally at the same time that McGregor is closing up shop. Another man arrives, a man named Commodore Louis Michel Ory. Ory was a French privateer, originally from France, and had been in the French Navy as a young man, and he'd been a French privateer in the early 18 teens. He had joined the Navy at Cartagena, a major city in Colombia today. It was its own city-state in the 19th century. He eventually joined in with a Mexican filibuster. He had a falling out with Simón Bolívar. He didn't like the assignment Bolivar gave him, so he said, I'm going out on my own, kind of like McGregor did. Ory set up shop in Galveston, Texas for a while, until he was muscled out of the way by two men you may have heard of, Jean and Pierre Lafitte, who were operating out of New Orleans. That's a name you may have heard of previously. So then Ory left Galveston and ended up in Amelia Island, right a couple days after McGregor had abandoned it. He shows him and says, whoa, there's a power vacuum here. This is great. So he takes over. And he declares himself chief of the Mexican Republic of Amelia Island. So I guess if you want to follow Ory's logic, that part of Florida was once part of Mexico. All right, how does that work exactly? Yeah, that's his plan at least. Ory was much more successful where McGregor had failed. So he brings in an estimated $500,000 worth of goods from privateering, prizes that were captured. That's a newspaper reporter's estimate. And if you multiply by 10, that gives you a rough idea of what the value is today. So $5 million in just a couple of months, in the fall of 1817. Ory was a very large-scale slave trader. So one of the cargoes that was a prize, right, of course, human cargoes. And slaves were traded through Amelia Island in very large numbers. I've been able to track down, by my estimate, between 600 and 950 people, which is quite a range, but that's the best I can do for how many people were brought in. And that's a large percentage of all the slaves that are smuggled in that period. So that's an enormous area of slave trafficking during that time. Ory wanted to form a legitimate government. He saw himself as setting up a government in Amelia Island, and he abruptly had welcomed two journalists from Buenos Aires who were in the process of writing a constitution for Amelia Island based on the United States Constitution and the Federalist Papers. That was the model that they were following. So he wanted it to be a legitimate place. This is another privateering commission. So you see here, issued at Amelia Island, but you can see the heading, the República Mexicana. Now, to the United States intervention. So that's who was taking over Amelia Island, and that is who the Monroe administration has to deal with. In the summer of 1817, so the Monroe administration is new. He's taken office in the spring of that year. So that's one of the first foreign policy challenges that the president has to deal with. There is an increased military presence in that area. So the Monroe directs the Navy to patrol the area. The U.S. brig Saranac is patrolling the St. Mary's River area. But you see, the problem they run up against very quickly is that this is foreign ground. This is Spanish territory or Spanish-American territory, whichever one it is. It's not the United States' territory. So that's the issue that the Navy is running into. This is foreign territory. They can keep an eye on things, and certainly if there's a spillover into the United States, into the St. Mary's River here, which is the border, then the United States can do something, but to be proactive, that's a little bit more difficult. I see some of this in letters. I've read the captain's letters, the captain's of the captain commander of the station there. He's writing back to the Secretary of the Navy, and he's writing complaining about the problems that he's encountering. In one incident, when McGregor was in charge, the privateer, someone who was operating out of Amelia Island, he came to Captain John Elton, the commander of the Saranac, and was asking, what would happen, say, if a vessel had a flag from McGregor's McGregor vessel, and it wanted to sail into Amelia Island, maybe with a legal cargo, maybe with not so legal cargo. What do you think you might do in that case? Asking for a friend, not me. What would happen? And Elton writes, he reports that he told this captain that he would consider McGregor's flag the flag of a neutral. And it was okay, everything will be fine. He wouldn't intervene unless some very flagrant cause should exist. Doesn't specify what a very flagrant cause is. But the message is, McGregor's flag is treated as a neutral, and his ships can be treated just like any other ships, any other vessels. They'll treat, as a neutral, the United States is obligated to treat Spain and its the rebelling colonies, the independent republics, as equals. So to treat Spanish ships just the same as McGregor ships. That was the direction that the naval commander was getting. Customs laws also have their limitations. So smuggling is a customs violation, right? It's introducing goods without paying tax on them. That's what smuggling is. So that also presents a problem because the customs law, as was written, only directed U.S. officials to intervene if the vessel involved were above a certain size, 10 tons. You know, big a ton? I have no idea. A ton is a measurement of volume, not mass in this period, when it applies to a ship. Okay, so not very big. The theory being that anything smaller, if it's a really small boat, it's not going to carry much of value. So if that's being smuggled, it's not really worth devoting resources to trying to intercept. And that's the idea. And ordinarily, that would be fine, except that Georgia and Florida are so close together that you can row things across the border there. And there are reports of slaves being assigned to do the rowing. Then slaves would be smuggled. So they'd be directed to row the boat, then they'd be smuggled into the United States. When it's just goods, slaves, the authorities could do something about. But when it's just goods, I mean, the authorities could know this is happening, but there's no law that says they need to intervene. So I guess in that case, you have your rowboat. Say, these are goods I haven't been taxed. I'll see you later. And catch you on the way back. There's nothing they can do. There's no legal reason to detain them. So Alton then writes back, said they can smuggle one or two rowboats at a time without detection. So that's the problem. The laws are not really apt to the situation. So in that summer, then the United States is really keeping a presence there, watching, but not being more active than that. As time goes into the fall, the Monroe has to make a decision about what to do. This is in the same period that Ori is taking over. The problem is continuing. It hasn't just gone away on its own. Spain is angry about what's happened. The fact that many of the people participating in the invasion of Amelia Island are Americans, that's a big problem. The United States has to be careful about becoming implicated in the invasion of Amelia Island. The cabinet, Monroe's cabinet, has its first full meeting at the end of October in 1817. Now, please tell me you celebrated that day. October 30th, first cabinet meeting? No. October 30th, 1817. Well, you can catch it for the 250th anniversary in 50 years. Okay. Now, you notice something. The first full meeting is in October. He became president in March. The first full cabinet meeting is, what is that, 6 months later? A little bit more than 6 months later? Yeah, that's a problem. It's a travel problem. John Quincy Adams, who was the Secretary of State, had just arrived in Washington not too long before that. So they didn't have everybody physically together. We were to come and make a decision together. As this has worked out in the fall, really in October, November of that year, in various meetings, John Quincy Adams is a strong advocate for intervening, sending the military in to seize Amelia Island. And he brings over Monroe to that viewpoint. So Adams was convinced Monroe that this is the policy to follow. There are really four reasons that come together. So four factors that come together to explain Monroe's decision to intervene outside the United States in what Spain claims as its territory. One reason is the violations of U.S. law. So Ori, in particular, had been involved in violating several U.S. laws, the smuggling laws, slave trading laws. The slave trade, the foreign slaves to the United States became illegal to all of the United States in 1808. So trade inside the United States is still legal, but bringing slaves in from abroad becomes fully illegal in 1808. So that's another area. Neutrality violations. It's against the law of the United States to participate in a war against a country that is at peace with the United States. So you can't go serve in the foreign military to attack a country at peace with the United States. So those of you who are students or are searching around for a career, cross that one off the list. You're not allowed to do that one. Yeah. Foreign mercenary, right. Cross that off the list. Okay. So if you've done something this week to enhance your career. And of course, the fourth law that's violated is piracy law. So seizing vessels without the proper commission. So the abuses of U.S. law have become flagrant through Amelia Island. I think it's also significant the timing of the emergence of Amelia Island as a problem area. This was the fourth center of privateering and piracy in the 18 teens. I mentioned before Baltimore and New Orleans have been problem areas, Galveston off the coast of Texas, and now here's a fourth one. If it had been first, say, then I think there would have been more of a sense to just wait and see, but it's the fourth one, and it seems like this problem is getting bigger. And the government really hasn't acted very strongly against the other ones. So now this is the opportunity to do something different. So the timing of this has an important impact. The fourth center emerging as it has in that period. The Monroe administration, Monroe and his cabinet officers, they decide that the governments of McGregor and Ori are not like other Spanish American governments. They don't need to be respected as legitimate, independent governments. McGregor's claim to legitimacy came from the fact that he received a commission from several Spanish American agents that authorized him to attack Amelia Island and to liberate the territory on behalf of the Spanish American countries. The problem with that commission, that seems pretty good, right? The problem with that is that McGregor received that commission in Philadelphia, where there was an active Spanish American network of agents in the city. That is illegal. To receive a foreign commission to attack a country at peace with the United States in U.S. territory. McGregor, he presents this to U.S. officials as like evidence that I'm doing the right thing. Well, and it says at the very bottom of this commission, it says, signed, sealed, and delivered, June, whatever, 1817, which is imperfect evidence of a felony. So you can't go around showing that to people. If the commission was received illegally, then it's legal itself, and there's no reason for the United States to respect the content of that document. Ori's legitimacy, U.S. officials could never figure out where exactly that came from, because he claimed to be acting on behalf of the Mexican Republic. Now, Ori had been commissioned and made a governor of Galveston by a representative of the independent Mexican Congress, but how that transferred to Florida was never clear, and that's something that can be very easily picked apart as being not standing up to scrutiny. So those two governments did not need to have the respect. The United States had no need to respect them the way they respected other governments in places like Venezuela or Buenos Aires or in Mexico. So it was a different case. Finally, there was a law that applied to the situation. And interestingly, it was a secret law. So they had a handy secret law. That would be really useful if you were president and wanted to do something. You could just announce, oh, we have this law that no one knows about, and it applies to this situation, and I'm going to follow it right now. The law was known as the No Transfer Resolution, and it had been enacted by Congress in 1811. What the law said was that the president was authorized to use force in Florida, only in Florida, if there was a danger of Florida moving from Spanish control to the control of some other power. The fear at the time was that Spain was growing weaker, and that due to its weakness, someone, especially Britain, might seize the Floridas. And the United States wanted Spain to have Florida so that the United States could get Florida from Spain. There had been negotiations undergoing since the early 19th century about obtaining the Floridas from Spain. They're not going to be able to get Florida from Spain if Spain doesn't have it. So the president was authorized to act to prevent anyone else other than Spain from having Florida. It was done secretly because if Congress announced that we have a law that we're going to invade Florida, that would probably precipitate somebody invading Florida to get it before the United States could. So they kept it secret. In the previous lecture, someone asked me, do we have these secret laws anymore? What are we having this? I had to say, no. But then I realized, how do I know? We have the FISA court, right, where there's sensitive national security matters, right, the judge. I'm guessing no, but I wouldn't know until it happens. Right? So we'll see. Well, we'll see. So that's a no transfer resolution. So all this come together to convince Monroe that intervention is a good idea, that whatever blowback that they'll get from Spain can be endured, from the Spanish-American countries, that whatever protests they put up can be endured, that there's a legal justification for this, that the United States is on solid ground. The actual invasion of Amelia Island happens at the end of December 1817. And it's really anticlimactic. The Army and the Navy show up. They play Yankee Doodle, Hail Columbia, take down Ory's flag, raise the American flag, and Ory departs. Gets on a ship, and he sails further into the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean to pursue further ventures in the future. We show like a battle or something, and Ory, yelled insults or something, that sword fight. No. He can see that there's overwhelming force and he departs. So that part is not particularly interesting. The United States shows up and occupies Amelia Island, makes Ory leave. Some reactions to the invasion in the United States. This is more interesting than the actual invasion itself. Some of the negative reactions to the invasion, criticisms that Monroe suffers. One of the leaders attacking Monroe is Henry Clay. Clay was a major booster of the Spanish-American independence. He wanted the United States to recognize Spanish-American independence. His American system, in part, it's really an America's system. The long-term vision was to integrate various parts of the Americas, North and South, into one sort of whole economic unit. Right? That was kind of his long-term vision that he had for interactions between the United States and Spanish America. Clay attacks, he attacks Monroe, says this harms the Spanish American republics, who are republics like the United States. Their revolution is like our revolution. We ought to be supporting them. France supported us. No one is supporting the Spanish American countries. We should play the French role in this revolution, like France played in our revolution. And instead of doing that, we're actually harming the Spanish American countries. That's the argument that he makes. Again, part of this is that this is a long-term interest of his, was in promoting Spanish-American independence. Part of this is also just politics. It's a way for Clay, who was kind of jockeying for position in the future, to attack the administration and bring Monroe down a peg, right, to kind of boost his own political fortunes in the future. So it's about both of those things. Some of the anti-administration papers, their line of attack was to defend Ory And when they come to the slave trading that's going on through Amelia Island, they develop an argument. So they basically argue, what was Ori supposed to do with these slaves? Right? His vessels, the Spanish are the ones carrying on the trade. There's a robust slave trade from Africa into Cuba, where the international slave trade was still legal. And so, well, they're privateers. They're supposed to capture vessels. And they capture a slave ship. They can't just let it go because then they'd go back to, they're not going to go back to Africa. And the Spanish and Cuba would get these guys. And then, well, you can't throw them overboard because that would just be cruel. And if you bring them into Amelia Island, you can't maintain them there. So what is Ori supposed to do? He's supposed to sell them and smuggle them. That's the only thing he can do. Right? That's the argument that administration papers develop. Not capturing slave ships, letting them go, restoring them to their freedom. That's not something that's even brought up. So they create an argument in which Ori is really kind of the victim here. There's the extra people, and it's not his fault that he has to smuggle these slaves. So that's the argument that is developed. Another point of criticism of the Monroe administration is that this is an example of U.S. overreach, that the United States should not be policing other places in the world. Even if it's just right across the border, this is the United States going out looking to solve other countries' problems, and rather than sticking to its own. Right? You hear that criticism. That's a familiar criticism we still hear today. The Spanish minister, foreign minister to the United States, Moniz, that's his picture there. He was predictably angry. At the time, the United States and Spain were involved in these high-stakes negotiations that would become the Transcontinental Treaty, in which the United States would acquire the Floridas. The United States gave up its claims to Texas and obtained lands in the Northwest, in the Oregon Territory. That was all still underway during this period. So John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State, he can't simply say, tough, deal with it, we're going to do what we want, because then that might harm the treaty negotiations. And so he has to finesse this. And Adams does a very skillful job here. He kind of throws the problem back onto the Spanish, saying the real problem is that Spain could not defend that territory, so we had to do the job for Spain. And he reports that he told this to the foreign minister. He said, "We have been obliged in our own defense to take the place, Amelia Island, in defense of our laws, of our commerce, and that of nations at peace with us, Spain included. So in other words, we did you a favor, Spain, by taking care of this problem that you should have taken care of." And then Adams tells the Spanish minister, if Spain can promise that you'll be able to defend Amelia Island, we'll leave. And of course, the Spanish minister knows by this point they can't defend Amelia Island. They're starting to lose control over other places in Spanish America. They're not going to devote the resources to the small island. He can't answer that. So then Adams can say, well, if you can't defend it, then we have to. So it's a skillful way of putting the problem back on the Spanish, rather than the United States being the aggressor. That was quite clever there. Monroe gets some very important support from a congressional committee that was charged with investigating and reporting back on what happened in Amelia Island. The committee found that Ori was flouting U.S. law in the ways that I mentioned previously, smuggling, slave dealing in particular. They found that slave smuggling was rife through Amelia Island, violating U.S. laws. And the committee countered the criticism that this was overreached by saying the United States had the obligation to provide leadership. If that meant being aggressive, then they should be aggressive, especially in fighting the foreign slave trade. There were a number of pro-administration newspapers. They painted Ori as different from other Spanish-American leaders. He was not like in Venezuela, not like Simón Bolívar or other leaders. He was a slave trader, they emphasized over and over again. The danger of the slave trade is something that the administration supporters hammered home. And here the administration benefits from kind of a strange convergence of both pro and anti-slavery sentiments. It's easy to see why anti-slavery people would be against slave smuggling through Amelia Island. They're against slavery, slave trade, everything. But slave owners were also very concerned and critical of slave smuggling through Amelia Island. The reason is that they were afraid that the slaves who were coming through Amelia Island were from the West Indies, from Haiti perhaps. And the slave owners were afraid that these West Indian slaves were going to bring ideas like revolution and possible race war, and would end up fomenting rebellion like in Haiti. So both anti-slavery and pro-slavery forces both wanted to keep a lid on the slave trade through Amelia Island. And Monroe was very fortunate to benefit from those two sides that should have been against each other, from them converging on this particular issue. At first, Monroe was leaning to leave Amelia Island. Seems to be where he's at first during his cabinet meetings in early January of 1818. The cabinet was divided, but eventually Monroe comes around to the point of view to stay. And he outlines his reasoning in a special message to Congress delivered on January 13th, 1818. And he made four main arguments here justifying his actions. First, he argued that Amelia Island was different from the other Spanish-American countries. We've seen that theme come up again and again. In the message to Congress, he says that Ouray was pretending to sovereignty. So not actually sovereign, but pretending to sovereignty, and therefore not a power that the United States was bound to treat as a neutral. So finally deciding that this is not neutral territory. The slave trade was criticized again and again. And here Monroe, in his words, he comes out, is very sympathetic to the argument that these slaves, there was something wrong with them because they came from the West Indies. He referred to them as slaves of the most odious and dangerous character, meaning that they had been influenced by Haitian rebellion, Haitian revolution ideas. And so he gives a nod to that particular concern. He also points to the threat posed to U.S. security. He argued that Florida ought not to be made instrumental through Spain's inability to defend it to purposes so injurious to the United States. So in other words, Spain is so weak, the United States must act. And finally, he expresses a concern about keeping Florida in Spanish hands so that the United States can acquire it. There is no part of the territory contemplated by the law of 1811 shall be occupied by a foreign government of any kind. British, of course, but also Spanish-American, pirate government, whatever. Spain needs to hang on to it in order to trade it to the United States. You see, those arguments converged here in a particular way that allowed Monroe to make a convincing case. And he was able to bring along the public. There was a very positive reaction to his message to Congress. And what could have been a source of enormous difficulty could have spread out from there, brought in Spanish problems, and Spain was allies with the British. It could have compromised the Transcontinental Treaty, but it doesn't. The problem is contained. It's about Amelia Island, and the negotiations go forward that eventually bring all of the Floridas into the United States. So it's a problem that was successfully handled, in part because of unique circumstances, but also, I think, because of the skillful way in which Monroe and his advisors were able to keep the United States neutral, but also pushing on their particular areas of interest in obtaining that territory from Spain. That brings me to the end of my lecture today, and thank you once more for coming and having me as your guest here tonight.